Problem 1 here gives us 2 points, 2-point locations, an x value and a y value. Now remember, that's always your x and that's always your y. So that's your x, that's your y. Now it wants to know the slope between these 2 points, the distance between these 2 points, and the middle point between the 2 points. So let's start off with slope. With slope, what we try to remember is it's basically the change in your y's over the change in your x's. Now, what I like to do is I like to have this little saying, rise with the y's, your y values, and run to the exit. Okay? So if there's a fire, you rise with the wise people, and then you run to the exit. So this helps me remember. It's rise over run, which most of us remember. If we're looking at a picture, that's very helpful. We can look and say, oh, I rise up this, I run over this, here's the slope. But it's not as easy if we're given points and we don't have a picture of it. So here this helps me remember, rise with the y's, so it's the change in my y's over the change in my x's. And again, if you think about it, rising, that's the change in your y values, because the y's are what go up and down. The x's are what go left and right. So here we're simply going to subtract our y's over the change in our x's. Now it doesn't really matter which y value I start with. I can either do 10 minus 8 or 8 minus 10. But if I start with this 10 when I do my y's, I have to start with that being my x point. So let's do that. Let's go, it's 10 minus 8. So the change in our y's. So here's our slope. It's going to be the change in our y's. We'll do it right here. 10 minus the 8. Over, now since I started with this y, I have to start with this x. 4 minus 6. Well, 10 minus 8 is 2. 4 minus 6 is negative 2. So that gives me a slope of negative 1. The reason you got to keep them in order because you're either going to be going, you got to see which direction you're going. And if you don't keep them in order, you might be going the wrong direction. You would have had a positive 1 here if you weren't careful. And again, a lot of teachers are going to say y sub 1 minus y sub 2, x sub 1 minus x sub 2. That's just telling you to keep the y's in order, that if you start with this y, you got to make sure you start with that x. That's all that's saying. So we have here, this guy's slope, negative 1. Now we need to look at the distance between them. Well, we need to end up using the distance formula, which is based off the Pythagorean theorem. If I have a point here and a point here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at how far apart it is just to come over here and then up to it, forming a right triangle. For example, if I have a point here and a point, not there, a point here, I can simply count over how much here, how much up here, and then I have the legs, and I'm looking for that distance between the points here. That's the change in your x's, change in the y's. The formula that we do for this is simply the change in our x's squared, that's the horizontal leg length right here, and we square it, added to the change in our y values, that's this length right here, and we square it. Now notice that from the Pythagorean theorem, we have x squared plus y squared equals this cp squared. You normally call it a and b. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Pythagorean theorem is going to give us that length. That's all that formula is. It's really the Pythagorean formula's shortened version of that to find the distance. So all we have to do is we come in here, we're going to do the change in our x's. Well, the x's go from 4 to 6. How far apart are they? The change. You go from 4 to 6 years of age, that's a change of 2. So simply do, it's the square root of 2 squared plus change in my y's, 10 to 8. That's a difference of 2 also squared. Doesn't matter about the negatives here because a negative 2 squared is going to be the same thing. Negative 2 times negative 2 is 4. 2 times 2, 4. So right here, with the distance, the nice thing is this, once we square it, it's going to be a positive value. Once we square it, it's going to be a positive value. So it really doesn't matter how we subtract them. We're just looking for the difference between them. This is going to end up being 4 and 4. It's the square root of 8. You can leave it this way. You could simplify it to where you pulled out and said 2 root 2. Or if you wanted, I think that's about 2.82 if I recall correctly. So about 2.8 if you want to know it to the tenths of how far apart that point and that point are. Now the midpoint. The midpoint is the middle point between these guys. Got a point here and a point here. Where's the middle? How do you find the middle between things? Well, if I want to know the middle between my age and somebody else's age, I simply add them together and divide by 2. Just like you try to find the middle of your test grades. If you make an 80 and a 70, how do you find the middle? You add 80 and 70 together and you divide by 2, which would give you 75. So all we're going to do to get the midpoint is we're going to find the middle point between these guys. All I'm going to do is find the middle point between my x's and the middle point between my y's. So that should be pretty easy enough. The formula would say, hey, take your x value and add the other x value and then divide by 2. Take your one y value, your other y value, add them together and divide by 2. That's how you find the average or the middle of them. So if I add these together, 4 and 6, that's 10. 10 divided by 2, 5. Well, you should be able to see the middle between 4 and 6 is, guess what? 5. Okay, so the middle of our x's is 5. What's the middle between 10 and 8? I can see that it's 9, but let's say there were numbers I couldn't see. 10 plus 8 is 18. 18 divided by 2, 9. So there we have it. The midpoint between these 2 points is the ordered pair 5, 9. A lot of things going on here, but they're not really that complicated if you just think about them. Problem 1 for you.